Here are 5 important reasons as to why you'd want to practice your mark making. The first one is to do with precision and control. So you are practicing holding your tool, you're practicing looking at the way that mark is made by that tool. So in this example, it's a crayon, and the way that a crayon makes its mark is quite different to the way that a sharpened pencil will make its mark. And also, of course, much thinner line that you're going to get with a pencil. And I'm so keen to mention that you can practice doing a broken line. One of the best things I ever learnt was the importance of a broken line and not to outline everything. By enhancing your precision and control, you'll do things like work with your tool up close to the end, or you move your hand down so that the line has way less control. Such a different looking mark when you have less control. And then when you move your hand right down to the end, the mark that you make gets nearly impossible to control, and so the line has this beautiful featheriness to it that just doesn't occur in any other way. The other thing that mark making does, and the reason why you might want to practice it, whether you're a beginner or a practiced, seasoned artist, is that it enhances your creativity. So if you're just mark making and nothing else, you are using things, you might be using different tools, but you are making marks in a way where you are just thinking about the impact that your mark has. In this example, this is a gelato, so it's a little bit like a crayon, but it's a much fatter, thicker, messier line. And again, that's going to give you a different look, a different feeling, and therefore a different expression and a different, and an expressive mark. The third reason as to why you might want to practice your mark making is that you start to develop an understanding about your materials. So by getting out different types of materials, this one now is a Zig double-ended marker. It's gold. I absolutely love this one. But by practicing with it, you get to understand different types of nibs. So the nib on this end is quite different to the nib on this end purely in size. So when you're practicing with different sized nibs, different sized tools, you start to realize about the different angle, that if you drag it and flick it around, the angle that you come up with creates a different type of mark. And which is very much what happens in calligraphy, that as you drag it down and you roll it around, you start to get beautifully different and therefore expressive marks, and you start to understand your materials. And that leads me perfectly into number 4. It's going to build your confidence and your mastery. This is a Liquitex paint marker, so you learn the basics of how to prime them, you learn how to look after the nib. So this nib has not been well looked after at all. And in fact, it's not been a great marker. And I have to prime it all the time in order to get it going. But immediately I am learning that this particular marker is beautifully transparent. It's a really lovely green that allows me to see the layer beneath. And just by picking it up and practicing on a substrate, and in this example, the substrate is a watercolor jelly print. So I did a little video on that one in case you're interested in how to get these beautifully soft marks on your paper using a jelly print, and I used actual leaves. So the fourth reason was about building confidence and building mastery, and all these reasons just work in beautifully together. The fifth reason, and for me this is the most important reason, is that you start to really practice developing your personal style, just mark making. So putting in lines, I'm doing broken lines here, so I'm starting and then I'm stopping, starting and stopping, starting and stopping. And one of the things that I have learnt to do very effectively is to flick the end. And I do this all the time in watercolour, and I'm doing it now with this marker. And by flicking the end, you learn to start with a fat mark where I'm using the belly, and then you flick it off to get a really fine mark. And I've gotten really good at that, and I really enjoy it. And that's what happens when you get masterful at something. You start to really enjoy it, and therefore you want to do it more. So I'm going to finish off with some mark making techniques. I'm just going to show you my watercolor palette. So I want to finish by talking about mark making in painting, and for me, I'm primarily a watercolor artist, so I'm going to talk about mark making in painting with watercolor, but it could apply to any paint, whether it's acrylics, oils, or whatever else you paint in or create in, or wherever you're using a brush to some extent. I'm just softening up some of this paint that's been sitting here on my palette. So starting again with number one was improving control. So I can use the tip of the brush to get an incredibly fine mark, and I'm going to come in with a water brush and soften that edge, and that mark now has a hard edge and a soft edge. This is a fascinating and fabulous tip for when you are wanting something to appear nearer and further away. That hard edge will generally appear closer, and the soft edge will generally appear further away. Classic mark making. Okay, let's gather up some more paint. And what other edge shall I go for? Oh, I know, I was going back to precision. So that was being very precise with the tip of the brush, and my hand was quite near the ferrule, not on it, but next to it, or ferrule. Some people say ferrule, some people say ferrule. It doesn't matter. I'm talking about this part of the brush that's holding all the little tiny hairs together. So if I move my hand further away, and that applies to all paintbrushes, I have now less control. So the mark is going to be different, and instantly I want to press down because it seems a little easier. I'm also going to twist the brush and get a slightly different mark, and my other favorite is letting the brush run out, and you start to get this dry brush effect, which is just the simplest and easiest of textures, which you can use for any sort of surface where you want to make it look like a path, a tree, a brick, stuff like that. Anyway, let's get straight into this mark here and soften. Classic watercolor is that I took too long, I was chatting away, and so now I'm going to create a different mark because I've rushed water into this area, not softened this edge because I wasn't fast enough, and so now I've pushed water in, and it's going to create a watermark, which is so easy to do in watercolor, and you can do it purposefully and of course not purposefully, and both of them can look either good or bad depending on what you like. The second thing that I talked about was enhancing your creativity. So the more you get used to using your tools, and particularly your brushes, it really applies to brushes, then you start to understand how that particular brush absorbs water and releases water. I haven't yet talked about moving your hand right to the end of the brush, and that means that you have the least amount of control. Just as with a pencil or a marker, I'm coming in, and it means that my mark is not going to be precise, and you can get something really interesting that you may not have intended. Already I think that looks more interesting next to the first mark. I start to get a little more creative as my hand moves down to the end and as I lose control, but also because I'm very familiar with this particular brush and how it behaves. I'm very familiar with how it picks up and releases water, and it releases and picks up water in a completely different way to this little cheapie that, by the way, I absolutely love. I don't think you have to buy expensive brushes. This is I think this cost me like $4. That'll be $4 Australian, and it's completely wonderful. But I might switch to it now because it's got a flat edge, and now you'll start to get very different marks. I'm going to load up with some of this turquoise. here, beautiful turquoise. By just simply sitting down and mark making, you will start to make marks where you begin to understand the shape that your brush will make. And so that is bringing you to understand more about your materials. And instantly I get a lot of paint and then very little paint as it starts to run out. You get less and less and less. I'm doing the classic dry brush again. And I'm just going to wash that off, wipe it off. And now I'm turning my brush into something that has almost no water. And this means I can lift up paint. Put it over there. I might drag it out, drag it through and drag it up and around. So this time I'm twisting the brush. And just by sitting down and mark making, and I know I'm not worried about the outcome, I do start to be more playful. And when I start to be more playful, I'm far more likely to be expressing my inner style, and I'm far more likely to be learning about my materials, and I'm just getting better every single time I do something like this. The third reason was mastery of materials. So different brushes and just doing mark making, all I'm doing is familiarizing myself in the most glorious, fun way with my tools. And in that case, that was a flat brush, and it's just called a flat brush because of that flat edge. This is another favorite brush of mine. This one is just a round, and it's just got a really beautiful point, and it's a slightly smaller amount of bristles. It's a size 8 round brush. Not that that's going to help that much. If you go and buy a size 8 in another brand, it'll be a little different. Anyway, still talking about materials and the stuff that you can do by practicing mark making. I am in love at the moment with dots, and dots are quite hard to do with a brush. You can buy a very particular brush which will give you dots, so you don't have to spend your time being really careful like this. If I wanted to do more careful dots, I'd bring my hand down to the control position and start to put in dots that are down here. Oh, a bit more paint. Beautiful. Look at it running into that water, which of course is classic wet in wet. Am I saying classic a lot today? It's classic. I'm switching colour a little bit over to this bluey turquoisey colour. Just putting in marks, and as soon as I get away from where the water is, I start to make a mark that's a little different. And because I'm just playing with mark making, I will just be practicing my skills, but in a joyful way, because I'm not worried about what the outcome is going to be. And I cannot help but be developing my personal style just by doing this sort of thing. The other thing I wanted to mention, of course, with watercolor paintings is that you can mark make over the top with other materials. So pencils, of course, will go on top in a beautiful way. This is called cross-hatching, by the way. It's not traditional cross-hatching, because traditional cross-hatching would be straight lines and straight. In this example, I've done curved lines, and I was following this contour when I did it. This is such a great thing to practice, is to follow the contour and follow that contour, but in an interesting way. And instantly, this painting belongs just to me. No one else is going to be able to produce this, and that's about developing your own style. And sometimes these little paintings can turn into something enjoyable, or sometimes that is all they are. It's just that they are practice. The other little thing I love to do just before I finish off is to use watercolor markers that release color. This is a Tombow marker. So it's a water-based marker, I should say. It's not a watercolor marker. It's water-based, but not a dye, it's an ink. Oh, don't quote me on that, I'll have to look it up. Anyway, you can wet water-based markers and get soft and hard lines. So I'm softening one side of the green mark and you get a really interesting mark that is developing around here. And you can see how I could just go and go and go. It's like a version of doodling, but you're mark making it simpler, and you can just try and think up as many different ways that you can mark make, or just do the same thing over and over. I want to finish with showing you this little collage I put together. It's on a piece of watercolor paper, I think. Anyway, a lovely piece of paper for the substrate. I've glued on little random bits of collage, and the final marks are made with a sewing machine. So marks can be made with any sort of tool that you want, and substrates can be anything that you want. It can be paper, it could be wood, it could be canvas, it could be a brick wall if you felt like it. If you ever have fires, you can grab some of that lovely charcoal and make marks just with charcoal. Get down and dirty sometimes can be really, really cool. I've done that quite a few times in the mud, and I'm surprised about how connected to the earth you'll feel while you're making some marks and being down and dirty. I so appreciate you watching, and I hope you got something out of this, and I hope you'll grab a tool that you do love or you don't love and explore it a little more and just do mark making. Thanks guys, see you next time. Bye.